Well, good evening, folks. It is Tuesday night, and I'm going live tonight instead of the pre recorded show. We had a couple of technical difficulties today that preempted the upload of the show I already recorded today. And so I'm just going live. It's good to see you here. Glad to see people coming in. And I was gone for the long weekend, Friday night through Saturday, Sunday, and all day Monday. We got back late last night. And so we are now here, and I want to thank you all for coming in. And let me just get readjusted here. There we go. And you see, I'm wearing a sweater, by the way. Up here in Wisconsin, Minnesota, we have gone suddenly from hot and humid almost overnight to big storms that rolled in yesterday and today. And all day today, it's been viciously windy. And I would say, while the thermometer on my deck read 80 degrees, I don't think we broke 60 to 65 today. It's always warmer on the deck because the sun hits that, pounds on it, heats it all up. So, hey, Audrey, how you doing? Thanks. Roger, good to see you. And let's see, that's Etheric Essentials by Deborah Tucker. Nice to see you, Deborah. And Donna, good to see you as well. And so tonight, while since we started the live radio program, which is playing right now over on, there's my shirt, Odyssey1.com, and it's Odysy, not the way you would normally spell Odyssey, but Odysy1.com. And you can listen to just the audio of the show today that we pre-recorded today. And the pre-record is just an easier way to get me through the whole system of all of this until I get used to doing this. Eventually, we're going to be taking live callers, and we're going to be doing the whole show live all the time. But for right now, I'm doing the pre-records just a few hours earlier, and then I come into the chat room, and I'm here with you while the show is playing. And you can go listen audio on the radio, or you can watch the live stream here. Anton, how you doing, brother? And so thank you all for coming in tonight. Due to technical difficulties, my stream stopped loading, and I finally just got that fixed. And so I'm coming on live because the full show, which I'm still debating, should I play that show tomorrow night or just do a whole new show for tomorrow? It's all in the can with the music and the bumps and all of that, which is, by the way, what I do for the radio show. And so there's a little shop talk out of the way. So that's why I'm in here live tonight. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the new members that have signed up and subscribed. Remember, if you are not subscribed, hit the subscribe button down below and then click on the little bell, and you'll get notifications as to when this thing goes live on the stream itself. And yes, Odyssey 1, Dare to Wonder. And so, yeah, these shirts are great, Audrey. I'll see if I can score you one. So we'll see what we can do. And so I appreciate you all being here, all of your support. That means a lot to me that you would do that. And so while we don't have a huge number of people that come in live into the chat room, if you'll go back and look at the videos, we do get some decent listenership. Now, I don't have 40,000 subscribers yet, so my numbers are a little lower than others in our little circle here, but it's growing. So if you can help spread the word about this live stream here on YouTube, I would appreciate that. And I'm glad you're here. Now, my wife and I, we got a little trip, and this is why I wasn't here last night. We just flew in late last night. We got in about an hour and a half after showtime. And so I'm seeing a notification right now. Odyssey 1 is just loading up after the news at the top of the hour. This show is going live, quote unquote, on the radio over at Odyssey1.com. So you can go listen there if you only want the audio. And it's the show that I already did. A little more polished than this right now. So we were gone on a trip this weekend. About this time last week, my wife got notification that she had won a sweepstakes. And if any of you have heard of the band Mumford and Sons, now I don't know much about them. I've heard their music playing because my wife likes them, and she's got them on both the Pandora that plays in the house and also on her phone that she hooks up to the speakers in the car. And so I hear a lot of Mumford and Sons, and I like their style. They're Irish, but their music is not stereotypically Irish music. That's just where they're from, and they had a really fresh sound, if you've ever heard them. So anyway, she signed up. Hey, Tariel, I think is how you pronounce that. Good to see you. And Jeannie, nice to see you. And those who are coming in. And so my wife signed up for a sweepstakes a little while back, and they called her last Tuesday or Wednesday and said, "Hey, you're the grand prize winner." And what it gave us was two full expense paid. It was two airline tickets to New York, and it was out in the Hamptons, Buffy, and way out on Long Island, as they say it. The Long Island. Oh, you're going to Long Island, eh? And so way out there in the really, I would call it the very upscale suburb, but it's way out. It's 2 hours from New York City, out on the Long Island. And all the mansions out there and the big homes and the beautifully manicured lawns. And it's not even lawns, it's estates out there. And so we got a free trip, airline tickets, hotel, all paid for, and our rental car, all paid for. And all we had to pay for was meals and incidentals and anything like that. And they had Mumford and Sons playing at a place called Steve's Talk House, which is really, you walk in there, it looks like a great little pub bar, something that has a long time reputation there. And up on their live stage is where the band played. And the place only fits about 200, maybe 250 people max. And so it was a small, intimate concert. And as they said from the stage last night, or 2 nights ago, they said that was feeling for them like they were going back to their roots, where they were playing in the small venues. And so it was very, very cool. Now, I will say I've got one beef, and that was with Hertz Rental Car. Now, we had vouchers to pick up our car. And so we found that there were no cars available at LaGuardia, where we flew in. So we had to take an Uber. It cost us about $50 to take an Uber about 20 minutes away from the airport to a smaller Hertz location that had cars. So the Uber dropped us off, and we got there. We got it all signed up, cars ready to go, reservations made. We've got the vouchers. And then, they always take a card when you pay your $200 deposit, which is refundable after you return the car. The problem is, in the state of New York, they don't take debit cards. We have a debit card with our bank, and we have rented from Hertz a few other times, and our debit card has never been an issue. Well, in New York, they don't take debit cards. And we stood in that lobby for about 2 hours trying to work that situation out. They told us if we had been gold members, that they could use our debit card. So we said, well, sign us up. And they said, well, it won't work the first purchase. So you can see everything, every option that was available, there was a way that it nixed it all off. And so we were left without a rental car. Now, we did find out when we finally got to our hotel in Hampton, East Hampton, Rainey looked it all up online and found out we have a gold membership. We just didn't even know it. And they didn't know that when we were at the Hertz rental car place. So while they couldn't take debit cards, and we don't take them anywhere in New York, it's against all our policies. Oh, but if you have the free gold card, then we can take your debit card. And I said, well, why don't you run it through anyway? They wouldn't do anything, nothing. So instead of having the car, we ended up spending, I think it was $228 for an Uber to take us from Great Neck, which is where the Hertz was, all the way to East Hampton. And so that's out of our pocket. But thanks to SiriusXM, who ran the sweepstakes, they told us, just turn in your receipts, we'll reimburse you. Well, so we had to take Ubers all weekend. So we spent about $500 cash on Ubers, which pretty much drained our spending money out there. So we had pizza and we had ribs and stuff like that. And we ate leftovers. So, but it was still an amazing trip. We walked out to the ocean front and spent some time in the sand out there. Rainy collected sand and shells. So it was actually a very, very good time. So we had a good time. And I'm just looking at some of the comments. Yeah, I hate that stuff. It's just like, you know what? Just look at our record. And we've rented cars from you. But I will say this about Hertz. Every time I have rented from them in the last year and a half, it's only been 3 times. We have had problems with them. When we rented a car to drive from here in Minnesota down to my daughter's wedding in May in Charleston, South Carolina, they accepted our debit card, no problem, but we had to have AAA, which we didn't have. And so we had to go purchase a AAA membership for $65. So we bought that. And you say 65 in the grand scheme of the cosmos is no big deal, except we live on a pretty tight budget over here. We're not made out of money like most of you, and we don't have lots to fall back on. We're raising 3 kids, and the money goes out as soon as it comes in. That's the kind of family we are. So having to do that is always a pain in the ass. So we bought the AAA, we got the car, and it was just fine. We rented from National Car Rental last year when we were down in Texas, and we drove back from Texas because I was driving that Tesla around, and I had to drop the Tesla back off with my buddy, and my wife came out with the kids. I drove up. I flew up, and I picked them up, and I drove his Tesla down, dropped it off in Dallas. We spent a little vacation in Dallas last summer. We rented a car. National, not a single problem. Nothing. So I'm going to tell you this. Hertz has cost me more money in the long run than customer service. And I have a problem with that. I told the people at the desk, I said, look, I own my own business. I have people who work for me sometimes, and I work for people. I'm not made of money. And I said, you know what? If I have a customer issue, customer service issue, I said, I will go bend over backwards for my customers. I'll do stuff for free. I had a guy that owed me, here's an example, $1,500. Well, we finally got that sorted out. That was due back in March. Well, he's been an old friend of mine. He sorted that out with me just the other day. And he said, I can give you $500. Would you take that? And I said, dude, and I shook his hand and I put my arms around him, gave him a hug. I said, I appreciate that. And I looked at him in the eye and I said, you and I are even. Call it even, buddy. And I get it. And you work with your customers and you do things. But when people don't work with your customer, yeah, Delaney, my wallet was hurt by Hertz, and hurts. Now, I will say this. Here's the anecdote or epilogue to this story. Rainey told me earlier today that she filled out, Hertz actually sent a thing to the email, Rainey's email, saying, hey, would you fill out a questionnaire on how our service was, because we saw you rented a car this weekend. She said, well, actually, we didn't rent your car. And here's why. And she gave him the whole what for. They called her on the phone from the national office. And the guy was very apologetic. My wife said, look, my wife's not irate, although I'll tell you a little secret. My wife swears like a randy sailor. And my wife is a hothead when she wants to be. She'll bash out your headlights with a fucking bat if she needed to. That's my wife. That's my lovely, delicate flower. But she was very polite and businesslike, and she said, I just don't think I'll ever do business with Hertz ever again. And she said, and frankly, she said, I'm going to recommend people not use Hertz either, for what it's worth. She said, I'm just one person, and it doesn't matter much to you guys. But you know what happened? They said, look, we don't want you to do that. They said, we will give you, they gave her a credit for free car rental for 3 days. So maybe they've redeemed themselves. I don't know. I'm going to write in too and tell them they need to change some of their policies because their policies are not nationwide. They change from state to state and office to office. So at least they took care of us. And I will say this for Hertz, there were some human beings there that did some very nice things today that did not let the policy override being decent people. And I appreciate that from them. After all my caterwaul and my belly aching here about it, they did the right thing. So that was good. I would have preferred 6 days, but 3 will do. So that's that. That's my little story. And other than that, we had a great time. It was so nice with just Rainey and me to get away. Now, I will say this. My oldest son just turned 10 with Rainey. Now, this is, many of you know, I have 3 older kids from a previous marriage. My 27-year-old twin daughters and my 18-year-old boy. They're all out of the house, and they live in North Carolina. They moved out, and I had sole custody of them when I met Rainey, and they lived in my home from 2001 until my daughters graduated from high school in 2009, I think it was. And my son was with us until about a year ago, and he went and moved down to live with his sisters down in North Carolina. And of course, they have a successful business going, their mermaid tail business, and so they're fine, all of them. But I've got a 10-year-old boy, a 7-year-old daughter, and a 4-year-old daughter. From time to time, you see their heads popping in here late at night. And ever since the 10-year-old was born, Rainey and I have not had a vacation together. We've been able to drop the kids off at grandma's, go see the movies, and do stuff like that. But we have not had a vacation together. We've done some things with the family, small outings, never really had enough to do things like Disney World or, go on big vacations or stuff like that. But we did little things together. My wife takes them out and does a lot with them. But she was able to go to Alaska to visit her sister earlier in the year, I think March or April. And that was nice. And so she got away for a week and had a good time, got a break. First time in 9.5 years for her. For me, we haven't been together on a trip in 10 years. We went down to my daughter's wedding in South Carolina. Many of you who follow me on Facebook saw all the photos of all the historical stuff we did. We took that opportunity after the wedding to drive back kind of slow and see things along the way. That's when, if you look at some of my videos, the Serpent Mound in Ohio, that's where we visited the Serpent Mound. We saw all the historical stuff back in Charleston. And so we have had little bits of opportunity as the kids are getting older. So this last weekend was a first in many ways. We got away together for the first time in over 10 years. Just she and I. And I'm talking not day trips to the mall or to the movies. I'm talking we took a weekend and went somewhere. And the kids did fine. They were all, we love you, we love you. And the little Ellery, my 4-year-old, I love you, Daddy. So, that's great stuff. And, but we had a good time together and we were able to, there's something to be said about walking around naked in your bedroom, the hotel room, without having little kids barge in and jump all over you. And so, that's got its own kettle of fish right there. But so it was very nice to get away. And so Toriel says, so understand, Scotty, we have 4 younger ones, 3 older. We haven't gone anywhere together either until this last weekend. Been 10 years for us as well. There you go. You get it. You know what I'm talking about. You know how it is. Terry, thank you. It was great. Jeannie, thank you. And, there are work-related things that I shouldn't take the time. But, there's going to be a day where I look back and I'm going to ask myself, did I get that job done for that client the way I was supposed to? Did I set him back a few days on my commitments with it? Or did I spend time with my wife? And it's tough enough around here as it is. I can sit at this desk 16 hours a day and have tons to do. And, I can say there are times I think I have people ask me, you're on the top of the heap, aren't you? Because of what I do. I've been doing art and design and illustration and writing and all of that for 40 years of my life. But I'm still in the status of some days starving artist. That fits. There are some days it's really good, and there are other days you wonder, how are we going to keep the electricity on next week? It does go that way sometimes. And I long ago, I'll tell you this, a little of my history, if you're interested. I've got other things to talk about too tonight. What I was going to talk about with the show about Sunday school and what we were taught. We'll get there. But I will say this, after I worked in advertising, and after 9/11, I was the creative director of an ad agency. We had 72 people in our agency, and we had a big print outfit that was connected with us as well. After 9/11, we lost about 75% of our business in that first 30 days. People just were afraid to do anything, to do marketing, advertising. Advertising took a huge hit in that first year after 9/11. And so we went from 72 down to about 12 people in about 60 days after 9/11. And then we cut a few more, and the company was owned by a family. They kept about 6 of their family members, and everybody else, including me, got cut. Now, advertising is a game of musical chairs. You can go from agency to agency, and you're known for your stuff, but at the time, nobody was hiring. So I started freelancing back in 2001. That's 18 years ago. And it was a rough start. But I kept building my business. And sometimes it's fabulous. It's really good. In the last 18 years, I've done a lot of stuff. I've done all my radio in the last 18 years. I've done all my writing of my books in the last 18 years. Not that I had time. And mind you, I've got projects right now, finishing The 10 Breaths of Ra, that fictional book. I've got a book that New Page Books through Red Wheel Weiser, my publisher, wants me to write on the book of Enoch. I haven't had time to write that yet, or to get into even doing an in-depth proposal for them. I just need to see what I'm going to write about, because it takes time away from the time you need to earn money. And so, you can look back and you go, in retrospect, I waste time here or there or that, and all of that. But I also office at home. My wife's a stay-at-home mom. We're here with the kids all day, both of us. And so all of that to say, some of you may be very familiar with that. You put out the best persona you can, the best foot forward, the best face forward, especially when you're doing things in public, like writing books, throwing events. Oh, I did the Paradigm Symposium for 5 years in there as well. And we had that event branch where we had, it wasn't overtly successful. People think because we threw that event and we had all those special speakers, we had the whole cast of Ancient Aliens in, Scott Walter, Robert Bauval, Robert Schock, John Anthony West before he passed away, many people that you'd recognize as authors. And we did that for 5 years, but we never turned a profit. I would spend 10 months of my year putting those events together while sustaining my business. Nobody paid me for that. And we were hoping to God, knock on wood, we would have a good turnout. And that first year, we had over 600 people. And that was phenomenal, that showed up at our event. This was our event. Micah Hanks was doing doing it with me back then. Then John Ward came on board and was working with me on that. And each year it got tougher and tougher to keep putting on a symposium. I would take in, my God, sometimes $300,000 just off of the Paradigm Symposium. But you know what? About 290,000 went right back out the door. That was for airfare, for hotel, for food, for speakers' fees, for all the advertising and marketing. And sometimes when we were at the end of a symposium, if we cleared enough money to go out to dinner and pay the mortgage payment that month, we were dancing a jig. And so in this day and age, and Rocky and I talk about this a lot on the Situation Room, it seems the more effort you put into something, the more you try, the more work you do. You work and work and work to still not get ahead of the game. And that's where we are in America. That's what things are like. But I got to tell you what, it's like I've heard some entrepreneurs say, an entrepreneur is somebody who will work 80 hours a week so they don't have to work 40. Listen to that. You work 80 hours a week so you don't have to work 40. That makes a lot of sense. And of course, I got to the point where there was ageism out there. I'm 58 years old. I'll be 59 in 2 months. I'm pushing 60. And you tell me that there are ad agencies who all want the young Turks out there that want to hire an almost 60-year-old art director or creative director. Doesn't happen. I get most of my work, all of my work, 100% of my work comes through freelancing. And that's why I market myself and advertise and all of that. So all I'm saying, wow, this is not a show about anything about what I talked about. I'm going to get there, though. I promise you. But this is organic. And so what do? You do your best. And you put your best foot forward. And you do your work and you try to get it done. And you try to have, hey, Joey, nice to see you. Joey Aragon lives. Good to see you. And so, Scott Dowers, good to see you as well. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. There might be some of you that are sitting fine and you're okay. Finances are good. And there might be some of you that struggle every day. And you look at that account dwindle every day. And, for me, if I get a job from a client and it's $500, we're like, woohoo, we got $500 in the account. Let's pay the internet bill. Let's pay the electric bill. And let's take the family out to Chinese buffet. But then, of course, my wife is gluten-free, so that doesn't do her any good. So, and then there are times where, you get a big check in. You say, we're taking the kids shopping. We're going to go to Target and let them cruise the toy aisle and pick something. And so, the way it is, it's up and down. People look at us. We don't look impoverished, and we're certainly not impoverished. But we, like typical Americans, the middle sector of America, we have good days and we have bad days. We have good months and we have bad months. And those months where you haul in $12,000 in receivables, and you're like, holy shit, what a good month. And then you just steel yourselves and prep yourself for the fact that next month and the month after that, you're going to bring in about $400. And then it comes in waves. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. So all of that's just a little personal history. That gives you a little bit to know what I'm all about, what I'm like. And I don't even know how I got into the personal stuff other than to say, this is who I am. This is what we do. This is how we survive. This is how we make things go. And so this radio show for me, there are times my wife will say, is your radio show bringing in income? I said, not yet, honey. When we get nationally syndicated and that thing goes down the road, it'll pay for itself. And it will eventually, but I don't do this for that. I do this because I love it and I love doing it. I love you guys. And when I say at the end of my shows, if you've watched me for any length of time, you will know at the end, I always say, you don't know how much I appreciate the fact that you would take your time to be here to listen to me blether. I appreciate that. And I really mean it. And I love you guys. I'm glad that you're here. So I appreciate that. And thank you, Audrey. Yeah, there's my website. So you can see I spilled coffee, so I'm wiping it up here. I hit my desk. Here, watch my camera. There, you see that? I hit my desk a little too hard and I spilled my coffee. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Audrey and everybody. And I'm not looking for praise or anything like that. I just know you're here and you're listening and I got time. My real show didn't upload, and so I'm just doing my own thing tonight. Now, I could get all esoteric and talk about all kinds of things on here tonight. And I'm going to get into this whole thing about it started with me thinking this weekend. I want to get back. I want to talk about this whole science versus religion quantum that is out there. How religion or even put that into, I'm using religion in a very general sense when I say that. Religion, I'm putting under that, not just church and churchified things and synagogue things. I'm talking about spirituality, metaphysics, the mysteries, which I've been talking about the paranormal, the weird stuff, all of that. I put that under the category of maybe religion should fit into that category instead of all of that being under religion. I'm just saying the things that are the stuff that aren't scientific, that we're all into, that we enjoy talking about, versus the scientific or skeptical community that will want to poo-poo everything you say. And so, thanks, Jennifer. And thanks for saying I look sharp. It's my winter sweater because, if we'd have had 65 degrees at the end of last winter when it was 10 below, 20 below some days with the wind chill, 70 below on rare occasions when the wind chill's on top of it, a sweater like this is nice. And 65 degrees would have felt absolutely amazing. But when it's after having 90 degrees, 95 degrees, even 100 degrees, really high dew points and humidity, it gets damn subtropical up here in Minnesota and Wisconsin in the summer. Don't let anybody let you think that we have frozen tundra here year around. We have a couple of weeks of really harsh winter, and it gets cold up here, yes, but the summer is subtropical, and it's almost oppressive to go outside. The beauty of that on those two ends is we have a beautiful transitional season. Spring and fall are absolutely gorgeous up here. So put on a sweater today. 6 months ago, 65, I'd have been outside in my flip-flops and my tank top and shorts, and I'd have been shoveling the ice off the sidewalk as it melted and going, wow, it's fantastic out here with this heat wave of 60 to 65 degrees. Of course, after the hot summer, 65 degrees feels like you're pushing zero. So I had a sweater on today. I'm wearing khaki shorts and a sweater. How about that? So yeah, we all freeze to death this winter. It's going to be a cold winter, I think. Anyway, back to this issue of now I've got some things that I've written on this that I called up, that I've made reference to when I pre-recorded the show today, and which is not playing now, by the way. I'm live right now, and it's where I get that question, or actually it's a statement. That's not what I learned in Sunday school. Now, I don't know how many of you out there are church folks, meaning you grew up in a particular religion, either out here in the West, Western civilization. Most of us in this country, it was a Christianized nation. And what I mean by that was not that it was a Christian nation, Christianized. There was a lot of Judeo-Christian values that formed the country and that the country is operated on. That's been changing over the last few decades. But that's a more recent change in things. And so when I say most of us grew up in synagogue or in church and went to Sunday school, that's really the truth of it. Many of us know the biblical stories, at least by memory, superficial attachment to those stories. And things like Noah and the Ark. Who doesn't know the Noah and the Ark story? Very few people nowadays. Who doesn't know about Moses and the Ten Commandments and the parting of the Red Sea, or Adam and Eve and the snake in the Garden of Eden, or Joseph and the amazing colorful coat? The stories like that. Who doesn't know about Jesus Christ and crucifixion and resurrection? Who hasn't heard those things? King David and Goliath. There are people who have nothing to do with religion that know what the David and Goliath reference is all about. And so without knowing anything about the story, And so we've all grown up with that, at least at our fingertips. Even if it's not something that we wanted to pursue, it was something that was at least in our culture and we knew it. I saw something here I wanted IOX says, even I, the pseudo antichrist, went to Sunday school. There you go. Yeah. And I went to Sunday school. We didn't as a family. We had a very agnostic family. And as I've said many times here before in describing some of the situation I grew up in, my mom's stepfather was a Jewish man. Now, after World War II, a couple of years, my mom was born during World War II. And then her father left. And my grandfather, her stepdad, married my grandmother when my mom was between 3 and 5 years old, back in the mid to late 1940s. And so he was the grandfather I grew up with. And he was a Jewish man, and his whole family was Jewish. They were Hungarian Jews. Now, he was American. He was born here and raised here, but his mother was old world Hungarian, Yiddish, Jewish as they come. And that whole side of the family, which I don't really see much of anymore, they were all Jewish and still are. And my grandfather in World War II, excuse me, he was with Patton's Third Army. And he was part of what he called the Crossing of the Bloody Danube. And he would tell stories. I videotaped him. And I say videotape, and I mean that. I had the big video camera that I was using, and this was back in the early 1990s. And I just sat him down, and I let him tell his war stories and his stories of that time. And he talked about walking with a friend of his in a field in Germany, and they're talking. He says, in the next minute, he turns, and his friend's gone, and he's laying on the ground behind him with half his head blown off from a sniper. And my grandfather, in relaying that story, even broke into tears, 50 plus years after the fact. And, about 50 years after the fact. And when he was in Germany with Patton's Third Army, he went AWOL to go to Hungary, to a small village. I think it was called Ekerit or Egelit or something like that. I can't remember the exact name, to look for his relatives. And when he got to their little town, there wasn't a single one of them left. They had all been deported on the boxcars. And before anybody weird and stupidly liberal or leftists makes a comment on that, it's not the same as deporting illegal immigrants. These people were all deported to Auschwitz, to Bergen-Belsen, to Dachau, to these different labor camps, which were extermination camps. And so my grandfather, he told the sad tale of not being able to find any of his relatives there. His whole family was gone, and except those that were in America. And but then he lapsed into telling me about, he says, but Scotty, there was this beautiful redhead that was like a barmaid in a little tavern there. And I met her, and he says, it was glorious. And he didn't get into too much detail with me, but I can imagine. My grandpa was a woman's man the whole time I knew him. He was single and a woman's man. They were divorced, he and my grandmother, way back when I was a young child. And so he told me that story. And but he rejoined his unit. And he didn't say he had any punishment for that, going AWOL, but I think there was probably a little bit of grace during that period of time. He was in on the liberation of 1 or 2 concentration camps, and he still had some of the memorabilia that he picked up. He had the 2 little Nazi flags on poles that were put on an SS staff car at one of the concentration camps. He had medals that he plucked up and helmets and different things like that. And he had those for the longest time. Then he pulled up stakes. He bought a little island down off the north coast of Honduras, white sand beaches, Caribbean, all of that. He became a dive master for a scuba dive master for a little resort down there. out on the beach, very third world down there, except for the resorts. Don't think Waikiki Beach or anything like that, or Trump Tower. It was nothing like that. This was built up out of the jungle. It was all thatched roofs and wood, and they had a key that grew off the main coral reef, and they had all kinds of cottages out there. Very elite for people that would sail their yachts in there and come and go scuba diving. And so that's what he did. Pirates Den Hotel, it was called. And that's my grandfather's story. And I don't know, I don't even remember why I side trailed onto that. I was talking about the things that we grow up with, probably talking about Judaism, that we were an agnostic family. That's where I started that. And so my mom let me go to church anywhere I want. I became churched when I was 11 years old. I joined the Baptist church. I met an old fellow, that's funny. I've always referred to him as an old fellow. His name was Bill Fisher. He was 60 years old when I met him, probably about a year and 2 months older than I am right now. And I'd been working out in a truck garden all day with my brother. We got hired for $5 for the whole day. We're talking 1972 to plant tomatoes behind a big machine. And we got paid $5 for it. Farmer made out like a bandit. And we were just happy to have $5. Whoa, $5 in 1972 for us. It'd be like a kid nowadays, being given $50 to $100 because we didn't have money. And so I'm covered in black dirt from head to foot. And I walk 2 blocks away. I ride my bike to a little cafe, Lloydie's Cafe, which was right off the Mississippi River Road, about 2 blocks from our house up here in Minnesota. And while I'm waiting for cheeseburgers on one of the little round stools, it was one of those very cool old-fashioned diners. And this old guy sitting next to me, and I only say old guy, very tan. He had muscles. He had short-sleeved shirt on, big biceps, and he had white hair. And he was sitting there, and he looked at me, he smiled, and he said, "Man, you're awfully dirty." And so I told him, well, we just came from truck garden and all of this, and we kind of hit it off. And he says, "Look, my name's Bill." And this shows you the difference in times, too, in almost 50 years. I was 11 years old at the time. He said, "Look," he says, "I run a bus route on Sunday mornings from Big Fourth Baptist Church." He says, "If you don't go to church anywhere and it's okay with your mom," he says, "why don't you come to church with us? We can stop by with the bus and pick you up." So sure enough, my mom said it was fine. I went to church the next morning, and that morning I became a born-again Christian. And it was genuine at the time. It wasn't cultish or anything I just remember doing that and saying, somebody asked, they asked the kids in our class if anybody would like to talk to anybody about what that means. I went and talked to them, so I prayed, and I became born-again Christian. And that was my introduction into the Baptist church. And I was in that church all the way through my seminary years. And I will say this, that Bill Fisher, that man, we did not have a father in our home. And my mom was looking for a big brother. The Big Brothers organization? She was looking for a big brother for me and one for my brother, my older brother. And Bill said to her, he said, "Look, if you don't mind, I can talk to that organization. I'd love to take that on with Scott." And so he became my official big brother, but he became my friend. He became my mentor. And he was, if you've ever heard me talk about being a fireplace builder or having worked as a stonemason, he was the bricklayer, stonemason, fireplace builder. And he apprenticed me. And back in 1972, I was working as a stonemason's apprentice and making pretty good weekend and summer money. But he and I, we went on camping trips together and stuff like that. We did all kinds of stuff together. He was like the dad I didn't have. And so he kind of helped me in the matters of the faith. And I'm saying that now, you can look back on it, and we all talk about how we were indoctrinated into things that we don't buy anymore, into religions that we don't believe in anymore. But he was a genuine man. He was the genuine article. And so he taught me That went for about 4 years, a little over 4 years, and then he died of prostate cancer. And so when I was about, what was I? I was 15. I thought I was 16. It was in 1976 that he passed. Yeah, so it was, and he was 64 years old. And so, um, and I, of course, went on to the Bible high school there at the church. Remember, I told you when I did wrote the Exodus reality with John Ward. I have pictures in my foreword of comic books that I was drawing of the Moses story back when I was 14 and 15. And Bill had taken those and showed them to the pastor of our church. And we had that big fortress church that had the big Christian day school and high school from kindergarten through 12th grade. We had the radio station. We had the Pillsbury Baptist Bible College down in Owatonna, big campus down there. We had Central Baptist Theological Seminary. All these things housed in that big church right there in Minneapolis. And so he talked to the pastor there, and he told me, because of your artwork, they're going to give you a scholarship to go to the art classes here at school. And all it was really, they went in and said, let's send him to the Christian high school. So 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I went to the Christian high school there. And so I was in the youth group at the church. There was an activity 3 to 4 nights out of the week for the youth because it was a huge church. I became, like the president of one of the boys' clubs within the youth group. We all knew each other. We all grew up together. We all were in that faith together. And I went to the college, Pillsbury Baptist Bible College. Then from there, I went on. I didn't go to Central Seminary. I went to Valley Baptist Theological Seminary because my friend Dr. Charles Ailing, who I've mentioned, he's the one that actually set me on the course of Sonnenmuth, this guy over my shoulder here. Dr. Ailing, remember I talked the other night about Chucky Ailing? In 72, when I was first in Sunday school at that church, 11 years old, the teacher gave us all little projects to write about, and he gave me Moses and the Exodus. And so he said, go see Chucky Ailing. And Chucky Ailing, of course, was Dr. Charles Ailing, who went on to become the chair of history at the University of Northwestern. And then he went on, he was there for 35 years, I think, and he retired not long ago. And he's the president of the Near East Biblical Archaeological Society. And he's an Egyptologist. He's an archaeologist. He's been to Egypt, excavated on tombs there and stuff like that. So Pillsbury, Anton, yes, Pillsbury. It was actually an old campus that was founded by George Pillsbury, I believe in the 1800s, the same George Pillsbury that founded the Pillsbury companies, the Pillsbury Doughboy and all of that. Well, he founded this as a military academy. And then the school bought it up, I think, in the early 1950s. The church did. Beautiful old main building with the big round glass stained window and the tower, the bell tower, and all of that. It was a great place. So you don't know who the Doughboy is, Anton? So yeah, we had to live that down all the time while we were there. I said they should have named the football team the Doughboys, but we had no connection to the Pillsbury Flour and Baking Goods Company at all. It just bore the name of the founder. And so it was Pillsbury Baptist Bible College. And you can look it up. Look up Pillsbury Baptist Bible College in Owatonna, Minnesota, Owatonna, Owatonna, Minnesota. And you'll see that beautiful campus. So all of that to say, that's where my education came from. That's where my indoctrination came from, if you will. And of course, while you're being indoctrinated into a faith, I don't think anybody there, my teachers and all that, they didn't view themselves as brainwashers or people that are trying to indoctrinate people. They genuinely believed what they believed because they had been indoctrinated themselves, generation after generation. And they taught what they knew to us. And we took that mantle on. But of course, I don't know, being the late 70s, early 80s, when the movement started, it seems like just the last few decades that, especially in America, people have turned away from that organized religion. They question it more. And I had lots of questions. And I became fed up with the non-answers. And I'm not talking about, oh, poor me, I had to go cry in my soup because I wasn't getting my questions answered. It was a genuine thing where I said, this feels like iron bars Christianity. I said, I don't think that's the way Christianity is supposed to operate. Very legalistic. Have you heard the term legalism? Legalistic? That's what we had. There was a grocery list of things that you do that says you are in God's will. And then there's a grocery list of things that you don't do because those will put you outside of God's will and you'll become a backslider and you've got to repent and come back to God. All of those things. So we had a very legalistic system. But for the most part, everybody there loved their faith and they believed what they believed. I was one of them. And I wanted to be a youth pastor because my youth pastor at that church was somebody I really tried to emulate. When I preached and taught, I wanted to preach and taught like he did. And that's what I did. And I remember his name was Paul Fosmark. And I remember somebody in the early 1980s heard me preaching. And they said, man, you sound just like Paul Fosmark. And I just beamed. I said, that's the best compliment anybody ever could have given me. And I'm going to tell you this little anecdotal story. It's just a little side trail. But when I was a youth pastor a few years later, there were a couple of kids in our youth group that were troublemakers. And there was one kid. His name was Paul. He was a troublemaker. His parents were part of the church. They made him go to youth group and the activities that we did every Saturday night. We had an activity. And for the kids to come to the church and we'd all go do something. And I made sure we had stuff all the time. And then I taught the kids classes and I had them on Tuesday nights for something and all of that, alongside working in advertising because the church couldn't afford to pay me. I was in a smaller church at this time. And this guy was a troublemaker, and you know the type, and didn't want to abide by the rules or anything like that. Well, that was in the early 1980s. And right around 1986 or 7, it might have even been closer to 1990, I got a phone call from him. And he says, Scott, this is Paul. You remember me? Oh, yeah, dude, I remember you. I didn't want to say why, but I remember you. How you doing, Paul? He says, I'm doing great. He says, I just wanted to tell you something. He says, I gave you so much trouble when I was a kid in the youth group. But I want you to know something. He says, because of you, he says, I'm in the ministry today and I'm going to be a youth pastor. And I wanted you to be the first one I told. And I said, oh man, thank you for telling me. And so, you know, when you work with these kids like that, even in that faith setting where I was already having questions and already having problems, I opened up to those kids and I taught them, this is how you live your life as a Christian. And I would ask the kids, and I've mentioned this before. One time I'd ask, why are you a Christian? I was going to teach something totally different. And I was looking at goofing around the troublemakers. And I said, let me ask you guys a question today. And it was just like this. I said, why are you here today? Other than your parents make you come to church. Why are you here? And so I got all kinds of answers that had nothing to do with why somebody would actually believe in a faith. And so we started talking about, I did a course every week for several weeks, and I entitled it, How to Become a Servant. And I said, and by that, in my Christianity, even though I was doubting some things, I said, your life has to emulate. I said, if you are to emulate what Jesus Christ was supposed to be, I said, you will be a servant to others. You will give of yourself. You will give of your time. I said, and being a servant isn't when somebody sees you do something. I said, being a servant is you get your fingernails dirty and when nobody is there to see it happen. And I tried, I went way out of my way to try to not only teach biblical principles, but to lead a life that these kids could watch, because they watch you. They know what you're all about. And mind you, this is all within that framework of something that we all talk about nowadays as being things we were indoctrinated into, and we've had to unindoctrinate ourselves, as Jeffrey Dougherty says. But at the time, I said, this is the best service I can do to these kids. There were times where, I don't know, we'd do stuff. We saw a young woman sitting on the side of the road shaking, and I knew might be a drug issue or something. I was driving some of these kids home from an activity, and I said, we should pull over. What do you think we should do, guys? I said, I think we should pull over and see if she's okay. Now, this is before cell phones, so nobody had a phone in their pocket. And I went over and I talked to her, and I had a blanket in the car. I threw a blanket over her shoulders. She was stoned out of her mind, or I don't know what it was, but she was in bad shape. And so one of the guys took my car and went and made a phone call. And I sat with her till the police came and they helped her. So there were things like that. I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm saying what I tried to do with these kids was to show them that your Christianity, your lifestyle, was something you need to concentrate on. It's how you live. Because one of my pet peeves when I was in ministry, and maybe Jeff could even tell you the same thing from when he was in ministry, it was seeing people on Sunday get all amen, glorified, singing the songs, listening to the preaching, listening to the teaching in the class, and all warm and fuzzy about what they believed. And by Monday morning, that went right out the window. It was just gone. And the frustrating thing was to put your heart and your soul into that stuff and see people not appropriate it. There was such a small percentage of people that would appropriate what you were trying to teach them. So all of that now, I got off on that rabbit trail. Now, we all know where I stand today. I'm fairly agnostic. I have lots of issues with biblical teaching. I think there is efficacy in it because I think there is real truth in there. I am not one who subscribes to the notion that Jesus did not exist. I think he did. I think there are too many evidences of that, not archaeological or historical evidences, although there are some, but the evidences of, who was it? It was Gamaliel, who was a Jewish rabbi who was part of the Sanhedrin during the time of Paul, I think it was. And he made a statement to the Sanhedrin. He says, this Christian movement, he says, if it's real, it'll go on. And who would we be to oppose it if it's really of God and he is the Messiah? But if it's false, it'll crumble. And so he was of the hands off for now. Let's see how it goes. And you see where the Christian movement has gone. Has there been a lot of subterfuge, a lot of lying, a lot of cheating, a lot of fakery along the way? Absolutely. But I believe there is something there at the core. When I have said I have left my faith, people would ask me, what do you do with the Jesus question? And my answer was always, I could teach a pretty good series of lessons on why he didn't exist, why the historical Jesus never existed, why he wasn't who we said he was. I know all that shit. But deep down, there's something in the heart that says, I can't throw out that baby with the bathwater yet. I need a little more convincing. And I sometimes look for it and I sometimes leave it alone. But I don't do anything with it either. It's way over there in a box, hidden on the top shelf of my mind behind all the books. That someday I'll deal with that. So I don't agree with all the teaching about, Jeff and I don't always see eye to eye on that. That's not a problem for us, though. He's still my friend. I love him. He's got a different approach to what he's doing. And he's not a denier either. He's just got a different approach to it all. So as for me, there's a soft spot for it. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go start attending the Baptist church or raise my kids Baptist either. That's not what it's about for me. So I want to know things, and there's so many things I don't know. And this is why science matters, This is why history matters. And this is why all this stuff matters. And by the way, folks, I normally end at 10 with the structured radio show. If you don't mind, I'm going to go on for just a little bit. I got to go on with Rocky in 1 hour. We got 1 hour from now, the Situation Room with Rocky, Stucci, and me going live. And I'll be there in an hour, and you should be there too. But if you're okay with it, I'm going to keep up here for a while, if you're all right with that. And Iowa, yeah, Sanhedrin were a band of blanks, but he kept good records. yeah, you're right. So the Sanhedrin were music areas. The worst fights happen in the music areas. Not sure what you mean there, unless I missed something earlier. So yeah, you don't want to miss tonight's Situation Room. I have a feeling Rocky is going to probe me on a story that Rainey told him. I'm not going to give away any thunder. I'm going to let Rocky have his thunder on this one, so to speak. So I can go another 30 minutes or so. So I think I'll probably broadcast what was to be tonight's show tomorrow night. I'll be here live in the chat room. You'll know it's a pre-record, but it's going to be fresh, fun, interesting material. So I don't want you to not be here. One of the fears of doing a pre-record, come on in, doing a pre-recorded show is that people will walk away from it and go, oh, it's not live. I'll be here live tomorrow night. Come here.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Everybody, do you want Rainey to come over and say hi? She's standing right there. She looks fabulous. Fabulous. Yeah, Audrey, it is. So come here. Come on. Come on. She's been out shopping all day and doing stuff. There's my lovely wife, Rainey.
Hi.
So there you go. She is the reason there's going to be a radio show tonight on the Situation Room, such as it looks like it's going to be. So she told Rocky some stories. She's not going to tell him here. You got to go to the Situation Room tonight to hear it. And that's all.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right. You done with this yet?
Within a half an hour, I'll be all done.
I need your time. Hurry up.
Okay.
I got ideas flowing, and I need to talk.
All right. I'll be out in just a little bit.
Okay.
All right. I will.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. So there you go. All right, folks. I started talking tonight about very loose-lipped about certain things in my past, and it all started because I'm talking about the first line of what I'm going to talk about tonight, and that's if you grew up in anything like me, you went to Sunday school or you went to synagogue, you went to church, and maybe even as an adult, you might even still attend today, for all I know. Now, I talk about religious education in the framework of Sunday school. It gives me this quick reference, pull up details I learned when I was a kid and stuff like that, and all the things that we were taught in our religious training. But they're going against the flow these days, especially the more study we do. If you were here for my series on King David, which lasted, I think, 17 episodes, digging into the life of David and the apologetic of David, you can see how the Bible itself, I can't even prove that the apologetic was written to be an apologetic, other than to say it bears all the earmarks of every other apologetic out there. And some of the facts don't jibe with each other. From book to book in the Bible that recap the same stories, they aren't always consistent. So that created a problem for me. That creates a problem for me with the Bible. So, Donna, Jeff cured you. I probably know what that's all being talked about there. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. Yeah, Donna said Sunday school and taught it when she was older. And so, yeah, I did Sunday school. I sang in church. I preached in church in the main services. I led the youth group. I did all of that stuff. So I was there. I was present and accounted for. I was a hell of a lot like Jeff. He was an evangelist, more Pentecostal than I was. I wasn't Pentecostal. Pentecostals were a little too hands in the air for us. Give Give Jesus a clap. Give Jesus a hand this morning. That was Pentecostal. We were like, we didn't do that. You just said amen. Glory sometimes if you were really worked up. So, yeah, there you go. And so in these Sunday school classes and church and all of this stuff, that's where we learn in a rudimentary form all those basic stories of the Bible and that whole embryonic systematic theology, whether we called it that or not. Most people don't even know what that means. That systematic theology, that dogma that formed our particular denomination's dogmas and doctrines. We all grew up with that in one respect or another, most of us anyway. And if you were Catholic, you went to catechism. You remember that? Any Catholics out there? Recovering Catholics? If you were Lutheran, you went to confirmation classes. If you were Jewish, it was bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. And, you know, if you grew up into teens, you went into Medrakim in your teens. And so there was all these teachings that we went through. And if you're of a different faith altogether or no faith at all, I'm sure you had the things that you believed or didn't believe. Some of you may not be familiar with any of this stuff at all because it just is foreign to the way you grew up and what you did. And by the way, you say you hated catechism, Anton? You know what? That's why I taught the way I taught to my youth group. I wanted them to enjoy the classes we talked about. I wanted them to be, the way I talk to you now is the way I preached in church. It's the way I talked in Sunday school. And it's the way I talked in classes that I taught these kids. You know, there was a song. I was big into the Christian music movement back then. If any of you were evangelical and you recognize some of these names like Michael Card, Amy Grant before she went secular, Steve Green, who was some of the other guys, Wayne Watson, and some of these people. These were all people that I admired in the Christian music movement. And we did a lot of that with the kids. And there's still songs I know today and remember today on the guitar that I used to play with the kids in the youth group and stuff like that. These were the ways I didn't feel I was indoctrinating anybody. I felt that I was trying to share my faith with people. But there was a song that I did in church and with the guitar. And all the folks who were maybe 20 years and older all kind of went, huh? When I sang it. It was one of Michael Card's songs. And he said, it said, in the ebb and flow of living, as we wander through the years, we're told to listen to a voice that we can't hear with our ears. They say to live by something that you can't see with your eyes. Is there really any purpose to this? Missing some of the words. Something disguise. The chorus, the refrain went, could it be you make your presence known so often by your absence? Could it be that questions tell us more than answers ever do? Could it be that you would really rather die than live without us? Could it be the only answer that means anything is you? And this was the song. I sang that song in church, and it was a song of questioning. And some people just didn't get it. It was like, it wasn't a hymn. It wasn't Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. It wasn't the old rugged cross, how sweet the sound. Or the old rugged cross. It wasn't any of those. It was something new. It was something different. It was by people who were thinkers, critical thinkers within that. I remember the group Petra, Trap Mike. What was the one? Grave Robber. We did that at church once. There is a place we must all stand alone. Where there's something where we must go to the great unknown. Like a vapor, this life is just waiting to pass. Like the flowers that bloom like the withering grass. But life seems so long and death so complete. And the grave an impossible portion to cheat. But there's one who has been there and still lives to tell. There is one who has been through both heaven and hell, and the grave will come up empty-handed that day. Jesus will come and steal us away. Where is the victory? Where is the prize when the grave robber comes like a thief in the night? And that's about all I remember. But you remember that song, Trap Mike. That's the stuff we were into. That's the stuff the kids were into. And whether I believe everything behind that on a faith level now anymore, the stuff is still that raw, real stuff that I believed at one time. And it's sad to me that there are holes poked through it. It's sad for me that things are not what they used to be. That's a grieving process. I still go through that a little bit, even though less now, because I've started to gain a little clearer head on certain things. And history, yeah, roots, Jama, exactly, Jama. There, all of this stuff is the stuff that hails back to the things we put our hearts into. And when you put your heart into something, it's hard to, what's the word I'm looking for? It's hard to come to terms with the fact that that just isn't so. And that started for me 25 years ago. And I've gotten to where I am now. And so while that stuff is real and it's fun to think back on, it's sad that we put so much time into that when there's so many gaps in that. There's so many problems with that. So, and maybe a waste, Donna. I don't know. You know, it formed who I am to a certain extent. But for the purposes of what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow night, as I've stated, I have to hail back to the roots of my Christianity and my Christian education. They're the foremost familiar tales stemming from much older, not so familiar historical religious accounts and mythologies. And if I were to approach an absolute stranger on the street and ask them about the Garden of Eden, about the serpent in the garden, Noah's Ark, the Great Flood, Moses, the Ten Commandments, they would, as with most people, have some idea what it was I was asking them, but they would have no idea of the intricacies of the story. And when you start to understand the intricacies of the story and start digging into it from a scientific level or a skeptical level or a questioning level, and I'll be honest, when I started that process, it was not to part ways with my faith. It was to ask the questions, why are there these holes in my faith? What can I do to answer the questions and fill the holes? And I found the holes just kept getting wider and deeper. And that's what caused me to walk away many years ago. And I think the last time I was in a church, my daughters were 15 or 16. They're 27 now. So you're talking 12, 13, 14. It was actually just before Rainey and I met. So it's a good 14 to 15 years ago. So they might have been a little younger with that. Faith with holes, SIOX. Why buy it in the first place? Because I believed it. It's easy to believe things. It's easy to put your faith in something when you feel you've had an experience. Some people might ask you or me the same question about ghosts or spirits or the paranormal or metaphysics or mysticism or visions, things like that. Until you've experienced it, it looks like something that, oh, why would you even put your faith in that? Well, because I didn't dig deep enough at the time. And at the time, it answered certain questions for me. And it wasn't until I grew a little more that those questions became broader. And I needed to dig deeper. And I needed to find more out. And then came the parting of ways. Jeannie says, as a child and a young adult, Christianity saved my life, so I'm grateful for it. The principles are worth that journey. Yeah, and I will say that. I agree with you 100%, Jeannie. The principles that are there are universal. How many times have I heard people say, well, Jesus' teachings are pretty Zen, pretty Buddhist to a certain respect. And I think that there was a lot added to the Jesus story, the red letter editions of the Bible. I think that there was a lot added over the centuries. We don't have the real story anymore. I believe he was a guy. I believe he existed. I've told you this one before. This is an archaeological, a historical item that gave the Jesus story a little bit more veracity to me when I was having questions. And you've heard me talk about this before, so don't get bored that I'm going to mention it again. But it seemed pertinent to fit it in here. I know the issue of Pontius Pilate. Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, the man who tried Jesus, who washed his hands and said, Barabbas or Jesus, according to the story. And he allowed Jesus to be crucified. He allowed the writ of execution. We all know who Pontius Pilate is from that story. Now, for centuries, Pontius Pilate was thought of as part of the Jesus myth because there was no archaeological evidence for the man ever existing. There were scant writings. There were even writings that said Pontius Pilate, after the death of Jesus, after some time himself turned to Christianity. But he also, in the Jesus story, is representative of a man who, in the questions he asked, represented Roman thinking. When he asked Jesus, what is truth? That was actually a Roman philosophy, a Roman set of beliefs that would ask that, what is truth? They were skeptics. And so it wasn't until 1964 in Caesarea Philippi, which is, I'm trying to think of what city it is. It's on the coast in Israel. It may still go by Caesarea Philippi. There's a modern name for it. But they were going through the ruins at Caesarea Philippi, which was the Roman capital of Judea, of what is now Israel. And they were looking at other things, but as they went up found this staircase, a crumbled up staircase. And some of the stones in the staircase had been built, reused stones from older buildings. And in that staircase, they found a cornerstone for a building with an inscription on it. And after dating, it dated back to the first century Judea. And the inscription said, in Latin, it was written, Pontius Pilatus, Praefectus Judea. And he was dedicating a gymnasium to Tiberius, and it was called the Tiberium. And there's a date on there that corresponds with roughly 26 to 30 AD. And this was the first bit of hardcore archaeological evidence that said Pontius Pilate existed. And he was a procurator, a governor of Judea. That cornerstone, you can see it today. It's in the Jerusalem Museum. And so that's an amazing bit of evidence. So all the naysaying about Pilate being part of the Jesus myth got washed away with one stone. It was about this big. It was a cornerstone. And so what you've got there is archaeological evidence that establishes the veracity of the person mentioned in the Jesus story. So does that make the Jesus story true? No. Sadly, it doesn't. What it does do is lend plausibility to the story because the man existed. So, and now there's other bits of evidence they found that establish more about him, that he was appointed by L. Aelius Sejanus, who was Tiberius Caesar's right-hand man in government. And Tiberius, when he went off to the Isle of Capri and made the movie Caligula with Peter O'Toole playing him, the X-rated movie, while he was off in his dotage on Capri, which you can go see the ruins of that palace today, and they're not all ruins, it's just a glorious place. L. Aelius Sejanus was left in charge of the Roman Empire. And it was later uncovered that Sejanus was, through politics, that he was trying to speed up his taking the Caesarship, the throne, the empire, away from Tiberius. And it probably wasn't true. It was probably he was a very ambitious man, and he was lined up to be the successor to Tiberius. But man, if you say anything wrong, he was offed. They killed him, his whole family, strangled them to death, and they killed 300 of his political allies. Now, what's come forward is that Sejanus had appointed Pilate to the prefecture in Judea. So Pilate's looked at as being a political ally of Sejanus, and he's now executed for treason. And so are 300 of his followers, his political allies. So it's conjecture, but Sejanus was fairly anti-Semitic. And his mandate to Pilate was subdue the Jews. I don't want any trouble out of that dusty little armpit of Judea. So Pilate did this, and there's evidence that he subdued 5 different rebellions of the Jews during his prefecture in Judea. But then everything just turned all of a sudden. And the conjecture is Sejanus is killed. Tiberius had a placate the Jews mandate for Judea. And so the whole policy changes. And you can almost speculate Caesar wants you to placate the Jews, so you better mind your P's and Q's. Because remember, Sejanus is dead and 300 of his allies politically. So when you read the Bible story and the Sanhedrin comes to Pilate and asks for a writ of execution, because the Sanhedrin could not execute without the permission of the Roman governor. And the Roman governor goes, "What's this guy done?" And they said, "Well, he's blasphemed in the temple." And Pilate's like, "I don't give a rat's ass. Get out of here." And they told him, "Well, he also claims that he's the king of the Jews." Not Donald Trump, Jesus. And they laid that on Pilate, and Pilate says, "I'll question him." He questions him, and he says, "Look, I don't find it." Remember that in the story? "I don't find any fault in him. Go away." And what does the Sanhedrin pull? In the biblical story, it says they say to Pilate, "Well, if you don't give us this writ of execution, we'll tell Caesar that you honor somebody who claims to be a king. Our only king is Caesar," says the Sanhedrin, "who hates Caesar, hates Rome. They want him gone." But they wanted what they wanted politically. So what does Pilate do? He's caught between a rock and a hard place. If I let this guy go, I could have trouble with Caesar, and I might end up strangled to death just like Sejanus. If I crucify him, execute him, I'm executing an innocent man. I don't think Pilate was the dog of a bad guy that some people like to make him out to be. But the Bible doesn't even say that. The story doesn't say he was a bad guy. It just says he washed his hands of it. Fine, I'll give you the writ of execution. Who was Jesus to him? Itinerant country rabbi. Didn't mean anything to Rome. But his position in his life and his possibly being in a bad place with Caesar because of the Sanhedrin, the ruling power in Jerusalem, and Caesar saying, "Placate the Jews." It would have been pretty altruistic, I think, of Pilate to not have washed his hands of it and signed that writ. So there's lots of conjecture in that, but this is what the existence of Pilate does to that story. It starts to tie in all the plausible little rabbit trails that come out in that story. So is it a true story? I don't know. We have plenty of historical record of the early church. Why don't we have a record of Jesus? I think because he wasn't a huge charismatic leader. He was the guy that started, and all his followers took it after that. He was almost a nobody. He taught quietly, except for the time he kicked the money changers out of the temple. And there's so many historical tidbits that I'd love to just go through. And I know I've talked about this before, but I got to mention this. I always wondered, one of my questions was, why could Jesus come in on Sunday riding a white donkey into Jerusalem and everybody's praising him and wanting him as the king? Hail the King of the Jews. Hosanna, they'd say. And yet, 4 or 5 days later, everybody's calling for his crucifixion. I've got an answer for that. Historically, and this is a historical apologetic, perhaps, but you look at this and it starts to build a plausible case. When the people were waving the palm fronds, and if you've ever heard me talk about this before, you might know where I'm going with this. Jesus riding into town on a donkey. Everybody's waving palm fronds because Jesus is coming. His disciples went out ahead of him and go, everybody's building the crowds of Jesus is coming into town. Everybody's doing this. But he had built up in his presence with the people where they wanted to see him deliver them from Rome. So Palm Sunday. You know what that was about? 100+ years earlier, Judas Maccabeus, known as Judas the Hammer, he had cleared the Greeks, the Persians, out of the temple in Jerusalem and led a revolt. And he actually went to Rome for the aid of Rome to help him. And Rome said, sure, we'll help you get those Greeks out of there. Of course, it came with caveats. But Judas Maccabeus, part of the Maccabean family, it's a historical fact. We know this. He cleared the temple. He led a revolt against the Greeks, and he won. Now, you know what the symbol of the Maccabean family was? The palm frond. When Jesus came riding into town and he'd been preaching the kingdom of God, these people thought he was going to be the next Judas Maccabeus and lead a revolt against Rome to throw off the yoke of Roman bondage. And so they're saying, hail to the king. He is the next Judas Maccabee. And they're waving the symbol of the Maccabean family, the palm frond, and laying it down on the street in his path. Well, in a few days, they found out Jesus said, my kingdom's not of this earth. My kingdom's in your heart. That tells you the real message of Jesus. I'm not here to be your king. I'm not here to be a political leader. And what happens? They turn on him. They got no more time for him. They wanted a deliverer. In their eyes, the Messiah was going to be the next Judas Maccabee who was going to deliver them from Rome. They were myopic. They wanted out from under Roman rule, and they'd be done. And so that's the story. And there's a whole lot more to that, but I don't want to go any further. My wife just messaged me and said, you done yet? So, folks, it's almost 10:30. Take that stuff, cogitate on that. Tomorrow, going to talk more about this stuff. And I'll be right here with you. Yeah, Jesus must have been a kick in the ass. Yeah, probably. I think he was just a gentle, probably very tender male who understood what masculinity was because he was tender. He taught about God. He taught about the kingdom in your heart. He talked about you being God's in your heart. His followers took it in a very different direction. So I believe he existed. So, folks, I want to thank you for being here. I appreciate your presence here. I appreciate the time you give me, your time, which is valuable and precious. I'll be back tomorrow night, as usual, and we'll take it from there. So be here in a half an hour. Rocky Stucci's Situation Room. Rejoin us. I'll be right here. So you have a good night. See you next time. Good night, folks.